If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. In today's podcast, Corbin and I discuss synaptogenesis and the role of weight training, aerobic exercise, and diet on the prevention of dementia.
One of my biggest fears in life is waking up one day and not realizing where I'm at and trying to remember who I am. I look into the mirror and I don't recognize the person standing in front of me. I see photos all around the room and I don't know who any of these people are. And that is what everyone who has dementia goes through. I believe it's a fear for almost all of us, is either getting dementia or going through the process of having Alzheimer's. Every single person in this world, they've experienced an individual with either dementia or Alzheimer's. It is not fun to watch an individual go through, and it is become a fear for a lot of loved ones who have witnessed it to actually go through that experience themselves. Today, although there is no way to prevent Alzheimer's or dementia, there is scientific information out there that strongly suggests there are ways to combat it or delay the onset of dementia or Alzheimer's. And I would like to talk about that today. So one of the things that studies suggest is actually getting enough oxygen to the brain, whether that be through Wim Hof breathing methods or cardio aerobic activity. But getting enough oxygen to the brain actually reflects more gray matter being developed inside of the brain itself. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, I would have to agree that Alzheimer's is a really strong fear for the majority of people, but I don't think it's something that is necessarily unpreventable. I don't think we know at this point whether it is unpreventable, what we can do to limit some of its causes. Obviously, it is a condition that is worsening in our aging population, and so we need to take whatever action we can now to minimize the risks of having Alzheimer's and diseases like Parkinson's and other diseases that are age-related. One of the best things that we can do is physical activity. And I think a concern for most is that we're able to continue to do that physical activity. Too often people become weaker as they age, and the more they age, the weaker they become and the less activity they can do. And it becomes this vicious cycle in terms of what are we capable of doing and what will we do as we age. And I think the important thing is to get people as physically active as possible. There were several studies that have come out recently, one that was published in Alzheimer's and Dementia, titled Late Life Physical Activity Relates to Brain Tissue Synaptic Integrity Markers in Older Adults, by Casaletto and others. And obviously, it's a pretty in-depth study, probably a little bit beyond what the listeners would really want to hear in terms of the specifics of the study. But the general outcome of the study was that physical activity is associated with synaptic integrity, the ability of the brain to transmit information from neuron to neuron. And it's not specific to general areas in the brain, or specific areas in the brain. It is much more kind of global within the brain. And so it affects the entire brain. And it's also time linked to the nature of the activity. So the more activity we're doing later in life, as we age and get closer to the risk of dementia, the better off we're going to be. And so we have to do things that are going to increase the capacity to do physical activity as we age.
So I agree. I think we definitely need to do more physical activity, and we got to start soon. On my personal experience working in a assisted living transitional building, there were a lot of people that were having the early stages of dementia or had full-on Alzheimer's. What was incredibly scary and really, really eye-opening for me is this ailment, this disease, does not discriminate. There was actually a gentleman who was about 54 years old, and he had full-on Alzheimer's. Really young, really fit for the most part, but unfortunately it just does not discriminate. A lot of the research out there, it does reflect that the more oxygen that we can get into the brain, the better it is. Now, we mentioned resistance training is definitely beneficial on the entire body, but a lot of the studies reflect or show that for the prevention of Alzheimer's, it would be beneficial for aerobic activity to get more oxygen throughout the body, get it to the brain, and then combat that. Let's talk about the difference between resistance training and then aerobic style like LISS, long intensity steady state cardio, and how is this going to affect the oxygen intake throughout the body?
Well, you're asking a pretty big question there, because that's like my entire course in exercise physiology to discuss that. So if you're looking at the difference between cardiovascular and resistance training, I mean, you have to look at exercise as a continuum. You know, you have, when we look at health-related physical fitness and physical health, we're looking at cardiorespiratory endurance, we're looking at muscular endurance, and we're looking at strength. And as well, we look at body composition and flexibility, which I think are kind of two separate things. They fall kind of outside, but within that continuum. But when we're looking at exercise, you know, we're looking at physical activity being minimal amount of activity, just simply movement. And, you know, for health purposes, any physical activity that's just simply moving is going to have benefit. The degree to benefit really depends on the amount of that physical activity, the nature of that physical activity, and so on. As we move along that continuum, you mentioned low intensity, steady state exercise. To me, that is really just a step beyond physical activity. In many regards, I consider it just simply healthier physical activity, because you're not doing a tremendous amount to stimulate the cardiovascular system. And in order for the cardiovascular system to adapt, we have to do specific activities to generate the specific adaptation. That's the principle of specificity. So with cardiovascular exercise, you know, I always take my students back to the Fick equation, which is, you know, the equation for oxygen consumption, or VO2, which is your heart rate times your stroke volume times your arteriovenous oxygen difference, or AVO2 difference, which is the difference in the amount of oxygen as the oxygen passes through the capillary. So you have oxygenated blood comes into the tissue. Depending on the amount of activity, you have deoxygenated blood leaving the tissue or leaving the capillary. And so the more oxygen that is removed, the more that has been used. When it comes down to improving cardiovascular fitness or cardiorespiratory endurance, it comes down to improving stroke volume, which is the ability of the heart muscle to eject blood. So the strength of the heart, the size of the heart, and kind of the nature of the contractions of that heart muscle. So if we have a healthy heart, we can train the heart to pump more blood as we increase the amount of activity that we're doing. the other half of the training adaptations comes from improvements in the AVO2 difference, which is increasing the number of mitochondria in the cell, increasing capillarization or blood flow to the tissue, and some of the other more cellular changes that occur within the body in response to aerobic exercise. And so in order to stimulate those increases in VO2, we have to be moving up in the intensity level. So low intensity, steady state exercise is great, in my opinion, more for burning calories, for getting just very general health. And then we want to move up in intensity, which means, we can also move kind of down in duration of exercise, because there's kind of an inverse relationship. The lower the intensity, the more duration we have to do. The higher the intensity, the less we have to do to get this kind of similar benefits. So that moves you kind of up in the range from low intensity to moderate intensity to, you can even do high intensity steady state, which would be, maybe just a 2-mile run on a treadmill at a fairly intense speed, which, most older adults and most unhealthy individuals cannot do. But then you move into discussion about high intensity interval type training. And as we move up the intensity spectrum, then we start moving into more muscle endurance. And then ultimately we move into strength. And those three parameters are not independent. Again, it's a continuum. And the more strength I have, the more activity I can do. And the more activity I can do, the more I'm going to benefit my cardiovascular system. And so they go hand in hand. I think obviously starting out, just doing some activity, getting the body conditioned to being able to move for any period of time and regularity is important. But as we improve and as we want to improve, we got to start doing the things that are going to allow us to do more activity at a higher intensity and maintain that as we age. And one of the issues that I see as we age that works against our health is that we see a shift toward doing just more low intensity, steady state activity. In the process, we begin to lose more muscle mass or simply lose muscle mass. We know that on average, individuals are going to lose about 10% of their muscle mass from the age of 25 to 50, from the age of 50 to 80, we're going to lose an additional 40%. So there's a significant amount, and it snowballs as we age. And it doesn't have to be. We can do more resistance training as we age to maintain that muscle mass, which means that we can do more cardio. And in the process of doing more cardio, we maintain our heart health, our brain health, and those types of things for a much longer period of time.
So with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people either don't have access to a gym or they don't have their own resistant home gym. What are some exercises that individuals can do in order to not only increase their heart rate, have it be a little bit more than that, as you described it, the low impact stuff? Would hiking be one? Would obviously body weight, like push-ups, squats, right around your house? For those elder listeners, busting out the Jack LaLanne tapes, like what are some good home remedies for an individual who doesn't have access to the gym?
There's always body weight activities, and I'm glad you mentioned Jack LaLanne. I'm surprised you even know who Jack LaLanne is at your age, but that was one of Jack LaLanne's whole premises. His TV show back in the late 60s, early 70s was to introduce housewives at the time, because it was a different society back then. But the homemakers who were home to using basic equipment around the house to do exercises, and that involved milk jugs, cans, doing dips and exercises on, just a kitchen chair. There's plenty we can do with minimal amount of equipment. There's when we talk the basic 5 that we've mentioned before, the squat, the deadlift, the bench press, the row, and the overhead press, you don't need equipment for any of that. Squatting is just sitting to standing. And if you are an older adult or an aging adult or a weak, younger adult that, has not built up a lot of strength yet, just simply doing body weight squats for repetitions is going to provide you some resistance to build some strength. And as that becomes too easy, what do you have around you that you can hold on to in order to add more body weight to you? It could be simply just holding a box on your chest that has some weight, some weighted whatever in it. Sandbags are great. There's plenty of things that we can hold on to and do repeated movements, and we can continue to add weight to those types of things. Deadlift is basically just picking things up off the ground in that proper form. Bench press, you can do push-ups, and if you can't do push-ups in the standard form, then you have modified push-ups where you decrease the lever length by doing them off of your knees instead of your toes. You can, if you have somebody that can assist you, if you can't do enough, well, they can help you get up off the ground and you lower yourself. Same goes for the row and the overhead press. You find weight around the house. Personally, I found the excuse during COVID not being able to exercise rather limited. I mean, yes, the gyms were closed, but it just took a little bit of ingenuity on some people's parts to be able to find what they can do locally. Cardio is, we've never needed equipment to do cardio, and it always surprises me the number of people that will drive 5 miles to a gym to walk 3 miles on a treadmill. Why not just walk around your neighborhood? And I understand a lot of neighborhoods are not safe. There are, reasons why people maybe can't get outside and walk. But we need just to help people be a little bit more creative. We need communities that are going to be more designed for people to be able to get out and get moving around. But even within your house, are there ways that you can move around? I trained a woman in Pittsburgh many, many years ago who lived in a rather large house. Her husband was very well to do, and she lived in actually one of these kind of mansions that were on Chatham College's campus. They're beautiful homes, but there were times, and they had a treadmill in the house. Sometimes she just didn't want to do the treadmill, and we would walk through the house. She just had a pathway that she could walk through, and we just walked as briskly as we can, took advantage of all the steps that were in the house, and did that for some aerobic activity. So a lot of it is look at your situation. What can I do with what I have to get some level of physical activity and strengthening based exercise to improve my capacity? I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
Good answer. I definitely agree with you with the comment on, I think we need to strengthen our community. I think in the realms of dementia and Alzheimer's, it is a come together moment if we know anyone with dementia or Alzheimer's. Most of the exercises that we talk about, although it's great to get your heart rate up and it's good to, pump the oxygen throughout the body, a lot of the other studies that are being reflected with Alzheimer's and dementia research is actually working the fine motor skills. And I kind of want to know your take on this. I know you're not necessarily an expert in the realm of dementia and Alzheimer's, but having your PhD with exercise physiology, working the fine motor skills to add more neurotransmitters throughout the body, or at least getting them activated and firing, the studies are reflecting that can actually delay the onset of dementia and Alzheimer's as well. What's your take on working each individual digit, each individual movement, whether it's circular, bending, just working those fine motor skills versus the overall body?
Well, I mean, again, you're getting back to the principle of specificity, and the body makes specific adaptations to impose demands. And so we can't just ignore one aspect of exercise. We have to consider all aspects of exercise. And so, we talked about the health-related components of physical fitness, the cardiorespiratory, muscle strength, muscle endurance, flexibility, and body composition. We've talked in the past about neuromotor skill-related physical fitness, and I think that we often ignore that in the old aging population because we tend to think of it, as in the past it's been labeled as more sport-related physical fitness, and it's not sport-related. It's involved with everything. And so fine motor skill, as well as speed, power, balance, coordination, which would kind of come under the fine motor skill. Reaction time is included in that, but I think we tend to overemphasize reaction time when most evidence will show that you really can't train for reaction time, but we can train for the brain's ability to process information more effectively. And so there's a lot of things that we can do in there that it will supplement what we're doing for the health-related skills. I think any kind of coordinated movement is going to be beneficial for anybody in the aging population, whether it's to offset the risk of Alzheimer's disease or any other form of dementia, to offset the risk of Parkinson's disease, but dancing, playing musical instruments, using your fine muscles in more refined fashion in order to maintain and develop those skills. All of that is going to contribute to a healthier brain. Now, is it necessarily going to prevent dementia? We don't know, but it certainly is not going to hurt. And it may, even if, say, there's a genetic component to the dementia that just cannot be prevented, or that a certain amount of dementia is part of the aging process or part of what's happening in the environment, if we are doing the things that will slow the decline of function, then that's going to be of a benefit. And so, again, we have to do a broad amount of things. We can't just simply be myopic in our fitness approach. We have to think fine motor skill, gross motor skill. We have to think cardiorespiratory. We have to think strength. We have to think muscle hypertrophy. Even if we are aging and even if we're not interested in bodybuilding, we need to consider the fact that hypertrophy is building muscle mass that is going to be functional, that is going to be able to translate into being able to do many, many more activities.
I think another key factor, another element of not only the physical realm, but the health realm is going to fall under the umbrella of nutrition. And doing the research with Alzheimer's and dementia, and a lot of other things too, as far as Parkinson's or anything that does have to do with the brain. There was a recent study that was done I think it was in 2018, and it was talking about diabetes type 3, which is diabetes in the brain. And that is becoming kind of more of a phenomenon of people looking at that with the deterioration of the brain. I do know some of the research some of the articles that you've even sent me, it shows the benefits of taking in protein and fat to actually combat dementia or Alzheimer's. I do think that's a really interesting thought process because, if you look back probably like 30 years ago and we look at our food pyramid, well, we were primarily focused on carbohydrates. And I think as a society, we're slowly starting to shift. I do know that there are a lot of brilliant minded doctors. Dr. Walsh, she talks about the benefits of fats like the omegas, taking natural source of B12 from grass-fed beef, getting natural sources of creatine can actually help with brain functionality as well. I know you're not a nutritionist, but as far as this new concept of diabetes type 3 and brain functionality, what's your take on that? What would your take on the proper nutrition? Should we add more fats to our diet? Obviously, protein is huge and beneficial, but I guess what I'm saying is on a subject of dementia and Alzheimer's, what would you say would be a great option for an individual who's trying to maintain that good brain functionality?
Okay. Again, you're correct. I'm not a nutritionist, so I really can't even address the idea of nutrition specific for dementia. I mean, that would just be irresponsible of me in my professional training to do that. I mean, obviously I could have opinions and thoughts on that. And certainly down the road, the intent is to have some professionals on who are a bit more experienced, focused in that area, are actually doing the research in those areas. But from a nutritional standpoint, nutrition's really not that hard. We tend to complicate it, and I think we complicate it because we gravitate toward trying to market our products rather than selling simplicity. That's why it's a lot harder to make money in exercise physiology than it is to make in medicine, because, we tend to treat the outcomes rather than prevent them. But from a nutritional standpoint, I would agree that we've made mistakes in the past in terms of emphasizing carbohydrate over the other macros. And in many cases, we've even neglected an emphasis on protein. We do know that protein, generally the body can maintain and even build to a certain extent muscle mass from or with protein intakes in the neighborhood of about 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound. And that has kind of historically been what the nutritionists, the dietitians have taught. And, it's reasonable. I personally recommend the very simple number of 1 to a pound, 1 gram per pound. And it's much easier to calculate. It's easy to be consistent. And we just divide that up over the course of the number of meals that we are eating throughout the day. And we've taken care of protein. And that brings us kind of then to carbohydrates and fat. And we know now much more that carbohydrates alone, particularly refined sugars, has a dramatic effect on inflammation. And it's more likely that has been a much bigger contributor to heart disease over the years and probably as well brain deterioration because of the highly refined amounts of carbohydrates that we've had in food. Now, carbohydrates alone are not a bad thing. And if we are physically active, we can probably manage a bit more refined carbohydrate, particularly around the workouts that we are performing, because that's when our insulin sensitivities will kick in and bring that glucose into the muscle where it's very much needed. But when we eat a lot of carbohydrates and we are not active, those carbohydrates promote insulin resistance, accumulation of fat in the body, inflammation in the body, and cause a lot more damage. Fats are not necessarily unhealthy. The problem is we tend to eat too much of the wrong types of fats, and we're eating a lot of that fat in conjunction with those high refined sugary foods. So it's more a matter of balancing the fats and carbohydrates based on what we need for our body to function properly and to maintain our body weight. And so we can have more fat if we need more calories. We can have more carbs if we are using those carbs in physical activity. And so not to drive this into a nutritional conversation, I think maybe in a future conversation we can talk more specifically about the balance of macros in the diet and what those should be. But when it comes to carbohydrates, my personal approach is to look at it from the standpoint of how much activity am I doing? And so if I am very active, I'm exercising much more, then my carbohydrates will go up slightly, particularly in the meals around my exercise sessions. If I am not active or it's a non-training day, then those carbs go down, and naturally they're going down because I have less caloric requirement. Fats, I tend to just kind of use those to balance out the calories that we need. Keep those roughly at a minimum, but having, the healthy types of fats. And, by healthy fats, it's easy just think in terms of the fats that are in nuts, avocados, olive oils, coconut oils, those types of fats, avoiding saturated fats, avoiding a lot of meat fats, red meat fats, saturated fats, and even kind of trying to avoid a bit more in terms of the dairy fats as well. And just eating healthier fats are going to give us a greater sense of cessation. So we're not going to be as hungry all the time. You look at the American diet, what do we eat for breakfast? Sugary cereals, breads, carbohydrates that are going to create an insulin spike that are going to, within hours, make us hungry again. And what are we going to do? We're going to grab the food that is most convenient, which tends to be highly processed, high fat, high sugary foods. And that creates another insulin spike. And our insulin is just all over the place. And, it's no surprise that we are becoming increasingly diabetic. I'm not as familiar with type 3 diabetes, so I'm not going to necessarily speak to that. We'll just have to pick up with that at a later time. All right, well, thanks for joining us today. Hope we learned a little bit about what we can be doing toward preventing and minimizing the risk of dementia. And certainly we will be coming back to this topic frequently, as it is a big concern for individuals who are aging and wanting to age successfully. And it is one of our big fears. I know personally it's one of my own fears that, I do all that I can health-wise to prevent heart disease and prevent physical deterioration. But, certainly facing the challenges that could come with aging and losing some of that cognitive ability does generate a little bit of fear in all of us. And so it will be a topic that we will come back to frequently, and hope that you will tune in for some of these future discussions. And in the meantime, keep aging well. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.